In 5, 2.
Tremaine, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you so
much. You live in New York, right?
I live in New York.
That's such an exciting place to go.
Yes.
Now, do you live in the city?
As a matter of fact, I live in the suburbs in a place called New Rochelle, New York, which is about 30 miles north of the city.
Those who live in the city, though, they seem to love it. Like there's some kind of a rhythm of life there that you don't find anywhere else.
Absolutely. That's my birthplace, and I love New York.
Yeah. This lady's very accomplished. She has a PhD and Afro-American Studies and Psychology from Yale.
Yes, ma'am.
Not bad, lady. I'm
you.
impressed. And has had, I would say, extreme sorrow in her life, and she explains it so well in a wonderfully named book called Sarah's Daughters. And looking back over this program about 10 years, maybe this subject's been addressed once. But you really do put a spotlight on it, and that's infertility and the unbelievable grief because of the strength of the desire to have a child. When did it kind of dawn on you that maybe you never would have children or birth your own children?
I think it's a process, you know. No one believes that at first, even if you hear a doctor's report that something is amiss. And in my case, there was no real physical problem that they could pinpoint and say, okay, this will prohibit you from ever having children. So it's a process of trying different things and waiting things out, of conceiving and losing pregnancies, and then going, okay, maybe this isn't going to work. I think it was getting older, coming to 40, 41, 42, and realizing nothing was happening. And most essentially, sitting in a women's conference several years ago and being in the midst of praise and worship and having God ask me succinctly, what would you say, and will you still love me if I tell you no? And that was a very shocking question from the Father. But when I said yes, then I was able to release this issue and move on with my life. So it's a process.
But how many years had you struggled with it?
We're talking about from the time I was about 26, because I got married at 25. So we're talking about the time I was about 26 until about 42. So we're talking about a long process where mentally and emotionally, through the adoption of my children and through pregnancy loss and all of the different techniques trying to get pregnant and keep a pregnancy, coming to grips with the fact that it was not going to be.
Because up to that time you had what we call hope.
Absolutely.
And I've heard it said that you can live several days without food and 3 or 4 days without water, but you can't live 5 minutes without hope. And the despair of that, you really described so well. I'd never given it any thought because I wanted 2 children. I had 2 children. But several years ago, I sat on a couch, you know, in an interview similar to this, and I saw something in the girl's eyes that I'd never seen before as she talked about it. And she talked about how painful to go to a baby shower, or to even be invited to one, or to see baby furniture, and all that. And since the greatest majority of women, you know, are able to conceive, we display very, very little sympathy.
Right. I think if you don't understand or you don't go through that, you really don't understand the pain that the person feels. And it's not that you're being cruel, and I even mentioned it in the book, you know, women talking about their children is just normal. It's what we do. So to be in the room where someone is talking about having their baby and what it was like and the labor, you not be able to participate in that conversation is very isolating.
Oh, I know, and women are so good at it. I mean, what our pains were, and
yes.
how many, and what the doctor did, and what the husband did, you know.
Yes.
And I can imagine you would feel extremely isolated. You had a really heavy case of bitterness over that.
I don't know if it was bitterness that I identified, because I don't think that I was bitter. I think it was just more hurt. that even as I talk about it in the book, it seemed like crackheads could have 7 children and leave them all in foster care. But I'm serving you, God. So why would you withhold this one thing from me that I really desire?
Well, and I think in your book you used the term, which I thought was pretty brilliant, that almost the message you got from the church that there was some kind of a spiritual defect
Absolutely.
in your life. So that must have required a lot of soul searching.
Absolutely. And thankfully, at the time, there were a few other women in my congregation going through the same issue. I think there were about 4 of us simultaneously trying to conceive. And we prayed for one another. One of those women did conceive ultimately in that congregation. 2 of us ultimately adopted at the same time, so our children are the same age, and 1 adopted later, so her children are younger than mine. But of the 4 of us, only 1 of us actually gave birth, and I think that's a real important statistic, that in the church we shouldn't ignore those people because they wind up being a part of your house, part of your congregation. They should be ministered to as well.
Did you go through a period of time where you thought, well, there must be something wrong with my relationship with God? Or
Absolutely. I think anytime we get a no, or anytime we see some area, because he's been so faithful in all the other areas, I must say God has, and I think that would give me pause too. Say, God, you've done this so quickly and this so quickly, and you've moved so quickly in all of these other domains. How come here this is such a stumbling block? So you do start to think, okay, maybe I've done something wrong, but as he begins to bless you in other areas, you go, okay, well, maybe I haven't done anything wrong. Maybe there's something else at work. And so I think going through the experience made me realize I was not a bad person. I was not harboring any secret bitterness toward anyone. I wasn't being unforgiving. I hadn't lied or
you went down the
sinned
checklist.
Right. I was like, okay, did I do any of these?
Okay.
You know,
All right,
so no, I wasn't any of
Checked
those
them all
things.
off.
Exactly. And then I looked at the other women and I said, I don't think there were any of those things either.
But you know, this isn't the desire for a convertible.
Right.
This is a desire to fulfill what women do.
Right.
You know, and I'm understanding more and more, especially from your book. I think we'll put your website up.
Thank
if you
you.
just tuned in. Talking with Tresmaine Grimes. She's Dr. Grimes. And the book is Sarah's Daughter, and it talks about the pain of infertility. But even in this, God has used this for His glory, for His kingdom. And we Americans forget that. We forget the kingdom. We forget eternity.
Exactly.
Now, what I did want to ask you, though, because insensitive people like myself never gave it much thought till we meet people like you. So it doesn't have the horrible cultural stigma that Abraham's wife, Sarah, faced. Now, since you've gone through it here in America, can you imagine what she faced? Can you even imagine it?
I can't imagine. Just the imagery that God gave me of her being the only woman around who didn't have a child. Because she's the first woman that's mentioned in the Bible that didn't have a child. And so that's why the book is named for her. Because nowhere else do you see any mention of any woman not begetting. And so here we come to Sarah, and the first thing we learn about her is her name, her husband, and that she's barren. So her, you know, that's all we know. She's a lady who's married to a wealthy man. She's very beautiful, obviously, because we hear about that a lot. But she's barren. And so to be that different
in that culture,
it's hard enough in our culture because people still look at you today and they're like, you're 35, you're 40, are you having any children? Well, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with the 2 of you? And I do talk about that in a chapter in the book as well, that people can be extremely cruel to people who have no children. I heard a woman, all of the comments that are in that chapter, by the way, are things